I'm going to ask Jonathan to come up so I can introduce Jonathan Turley. Jonathan, everyone has on the table the bios, so I'm going to forego anything longer than just to say that Jonathan Turley is a professor of law at George Washington University Law School and a frequent contributor to Fox News. I had asked Jonathan, we had the privilege of hearing him speak last year after his first book was published, which was The Indispensable Right, Free Speech in an Age of Rage. We've talked a lot today about how important free speech is to FSF and to the country. Jonathan's new book is obviously timely, Rage in the Republic, The Unfinished Story of the American Revolution. You can see I've got a bunch of markers already on my copy of the book. We've talked a lot today about this is the Free State Foundation's 20th anniversary, and as important as that is to me and us, I have no doubt that everyone here in this room, including myself, understands that America's birthday celebration this year, of course, is much more important, and we're happy that you're going to be here that you are here to talk about your book and America's Revolution.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here, and I'll get right into it because I think we only have a short period to cover a lot of history and cover a lot of book. This book is really about revolutions, how they begin, and more importantly, how they end. Most revolutions do not end well, which is one of the reasons why the American Revolution was so unique. And often, as we celebrate things like our 250th anniversary, we forget what makes us unique. We forget what brought us to this point. And that can be a dangerous conceit that just because we have been here for 250 years, that we will be here for 250 more. Now, the fact is that when this experiment in democracy began, this country was a fascination of the world. John Locke famously said that in the beginning, all the world was America. And he was referring not just to the fact that this was an unexplored territory. He was referring to the fact that there was a place that most anything was possible, that they were inventing a world anew. And that really captured what people were writing about this time 250 years ago. What was unique about the American Revolution is that it was the world's first major Enlightenment revolution. Now, the Enlightenment writers have been around a long time, but if you read the Declaration of Independence, it is an Enlightenment document from beginning to end. It talks about how rights come not from the government, but from God. How rights belong to human beings because they're human, because those rights are needed to be fully human. That was a revolutionary idea then, and it's a revolutionary idea now. But I think that what we are experiencing is a certain crisis of faith, which I will get to in a second. But the Enlightenment revolution captured the fascination of writers around the world. Rage in the Republic talks about one French writer who had a very popular book in French at the time. He had come here, he became a farmer, and he then wrote a book on what he had seen, and it became a bestseller in France. But what I take from the book is actually one line, which fascinated me, and it clearly fascinated him. And that is where he asks, what then is this American? It was a question that he asked in just self-revealing honesty. People didn't know anything about us. What they couldn't understand is how you could have Enlightenment writers had written for decades. Then suddenly a people who had no connection to each other, no connection to the land, no calcified institutions, no stratified classes, would come together at a point on the globe and create the world's first Enlightenment revolution. They couldn't understand it. They talked about us as if we were a new species. And indeed, when you look at the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, you see why we are unique. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights are often the focus of professors. Indeed, most professors discard the Declaration of Independence. Some judges did, including Justice Scalia often sort of brushed it aside. It was one of the few things he got wrong. The fact is that the Declaration of Independence is the very document that defines us. You know, I'm a Madisonian scholar, so I should be talking up the Constitution. But I always joke that when people come up to me after speeches and say, you know, I just love reading the Constitution, I know they've never read it. Because no one enjoys reading. Why would you enjoy reading a Constitution? It reads like the tax code. It was written by a wonk. It wasn't supposed to be inspiring. If you want an inspiring constitution, read one of the French constitutions. They had lots of practice because they failed so often. So what Madison was doing with the U.S. Constitution was to create a system that would guarantee what was promised in the Declaration of Independence. But it was the Declaration of Independence that defined a new people. And it defined it in very much Lockean terms. I've had these rigorous debates with other law professors who really continue to amaze me, because many law professors go to great lengths to say, you know, Locke didn't have that much influence on the framers, which I find otherworldly. Apparently all the references to Locke, all the quotes from Locke are something that we are supposed to brush aside. But it is a Lockean document from beginning to end. This idea that there are self-evident truths that come from God, that imbues the Declaration of Independence. Now, Rage of the Republic is a little odd because this is one of the things that historians have pointed out about the book, is that Turley seems to have a fascination with Thomas Paine. And when I presented this book at the Library of Congress, a historian said, are you just in love with Thomas Paine? I mean, you obviously spent 6 years researching him, and it comes out in the book. And it's a strange thing. Thomas Paine is a strange subject, and I'll tell you in a second why I became so fixated on him and why this book follows his travels. First, the most obvious being that he was one of only two figures, major figures in the American Revolution, that played a role in both of the contemporary revolutions, played a role in both the American and French revolutions. And the French Revolution almost killed both of them, the other being Lafayette. But Paine is much more interesting than that. He's inexhaustibly interesting. I told this story, and I mentioned in the book that I'm a big film noir nut. I'm one of those people that can't work without something playing in the background. So it's almost always film noir. It drives my children crazy. But the greatest line ever delivered in a film noir movie was delivered by Robert Ryan to Joan Fontaine in Born to Be Bad, where he realizes she was the ultimate femme fatale. She had devoured every man in her life, and then he realizes that he was just the last of her diet. And so he goes to the door as she begs him to stay, and he turns to her and says, you know, I love you so much, I only wish I liked you. You sort of have that feeling about Paine. You love him so much, but he's awfully hard to like. The book, I talk about how the book, Benjamin Franklin's daughter said, it would have been far better if Thomas Paine had died after Common Sense. And I point out in the book, she was one of his friends. So you sort of get an idea of what an acquired taste Thomas Paine is. But he is an amazing figure. He's courageous, and he's principled. He's generous, and he's obnoxious, and he's reckless. And he may be the single most self-destructive personality I've ever researched. And he may have been the quintessential American. He was certainly the most revolutionary of the American Revolution. What's astonishing is that he came to this country 2 years before the Declaration of Independence. 2 years. And he was an utter wreck. Maybe that's what fascinates me about him. He was a corset maker. His father was a corset maker. It was a terrible job. Corset making was going out of style. You're welcome. But he hated it. It was a very difficult job. Didn't pay much. So he wanted out. So he decided that he would become a pirate. A privateer, same thing, sort of a legal pirate. He answered an ad to join the ship the Terrible and join Captain Death on an adventure for all able-bodied young men. And he agreed. His father actually really shows something interesting about corset making. His father was trying to find his son. So he didn't go to the police. He went to a corset maker in London and said, I need to find my son. And it appears that the corset makers were the most incredible intelligence network the world has ever seen. Within like a day, they said, he's on the Terrible. Your son's about to become a pirate. So he goes to the ship and takes him off the ship just before it sails. And it was a good thing, because the Terrible sailed and ran right into a French privateer by the name of the Vengeance. And the French killed, out of 167 crew members on the Terrible, it killed 150. And the other 17 were thrown into a prison barge. We wouldn't have seen Thomas Paine again. He ultimately did become a privateer, by the way, on a much luckier boat. They took 6 French frigates, which is a pretty good haul. And as a seaman, he was able to get a small percentage of that. And suddenly Thomas Paine had something he had never seen before, never experienced before: money. And he used it because he was not educated in a formal way. He used it to take classes. And it turned out that everyone offering classes were members of the Scottish Enlightenment. And Thomas Paine gobbled it up. He used up all of his money. He went and got a job, was fired, another job, was fired, created a business, and went bankrupt. Every job Thomas Paine held, and every that he held before coming to the United States, he was fired from. Every business he created went bankrupt. His 2 marriages were disasters. And he ended up in London, penniless, friendless, in front of apparently the one man who looked at this heap of human wreckage and saw something. And that man was Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin not only saw something in this odd individual, but he sent him to America, wrote his son, and told Thomas Paine, I'm going to pay for you to go to America, and you're going to write. He had never been a professional writer. Maybe it takes genius to recognize genius, because within 2 years, he would write the world's first global bestseller. Even when that book came out anonymously, he was so unknown, no one thought he wrote it. No one knew who he was. John Adams' wife wrote him and said, people say you wrote it. And John Adams, who was no fan of Thomas Paine, in fact, I think he was a bit jealous of Thomas Paine. It's like a sort of a Johnny-come-lately. Wrote back to his wife and he said, I couldn't have written that book. But he says, I think I know who did. He said, I met a man once, and his name was Thomas Paine, and he had genius in his eyes. Of course, it was Thomas Paine who became the voice of the American Revolution. Maybe that's what Franklin saw. He became the righteous rage. He knew what it would take to move a people to revolution, just as James Madison knew what it would take to move a revolution to a republic. Thomas Paine once said, there's a happy something in the climate of America. And I think he was referring to the fact that this was a place where all things are possible. He added an E to his name, and he became the one thing the world was looking for. He became Thomas Paine. So what happened with this revolution is that it was the creation of figures like Paine and Madison. Now, Paine did not like what Madison called the auxiliary precautions. He liked more direct democracy. That's why when he went to Paris, he had them at hello. They loved it. They were all Rousseauians. They believed that if you just give people power, the general will be good because they are good. The very thing that Madison rejected on the need to have a structure, a framing. They didn't want the Greek democracies. Everyone talks about the Athenian democracy. Athenian democracy didn't last very long. If you were there, you wouldn't recognize it as democracy. And it ended up in tyranny. Why would you want that? They wanted something the world had never created before. A system that would be able to have that passion, that power, that push of a democracy, but the stability of a monarchy. They wanted to defeat what one writer, in fact, the Thomas Paine of the French Revolution, wrote about the French Revolution. When he said that, like Saturn, the revolution devours its children. Thomas Paine watched that, and it almost devoured him. The Raging Republic talks about one scene where he's left hiding, essentially, or at least in refuge in a little inn outside of Paris as the executions are speeding up with his 7 remaining friends. He was associated with the Girondins, the moderate Jacobins. And man, did they blow that one. The mountain was taking them one by one and executing them, their fellow Jacobin allies. And one by one, the knock came on the door, and one by one they were led out of the inn. Till they finally, a knock came and they took the innkeeper, executed him, and Paine was alone. And then finally the knock came for him. He left with a copy of a book he had just finished minutes before. That book was Rights of Man. And so they took him, and he was actually saved ultimately from execution, as I'll mention in a second. But he witnessed what he didn't realize was the true miracle of Philadelphia. Philadelphia was exploding in violence after the revolution. The book talks about what's called the Battle of Fort Wilson. It was really Wilson's home. It looked very much like Paris. And then it stopped. The only event that occurred between those 2 points was the ratification of the U.S. Constitution. Suddenly, people that didn't like the Constitution, and Pennsylvania barely passed, still believed that it gave them skin in a game. And so Philadelphia went on to become the world's most stable, part of the world's most stable democracy, and France became a bloodletting called the Terror. And then Paine was saved from execution by a swinging door. He was supposed to be executed, but he was sick, so his Belgian cellmates asked if they could open the door for air. But when they did, they moved the chalk mark, which showed that all of them were to be executed, against the wall when it was open. So they passed by the cell that night, or Paine again would have been gone. So corsets saved the American Revolution, and then so did a swinging door. So the second half of the book looks forward and asks, can this unique republic survive the 21st century? Can it survive us? And I talk about the rise of new Jacobins, professors, deans, who are calling for scrapping, trashing the U.S. Constitution. I have a colleague who wants to amend the First Amendment because she says it's aggressively individualistic, which I find enormously funny. But we face our own problems. The book talks about AI and robotics. Taking the most conservative estimates on the job loss of AI, we're looking at a massive economic shift globally. We're looking at a loss of jobs that we have never experienced since the Great Depression, and it may dwarf that. We are looking at millions of people who are not just going to be unemployed, they're going to be unemployable. Now, I'm a big believer in the free market. I believe the free market will burn off what existed before and will create new jobs, but there will be a transition. And this book looks at what we are going to do about that. And it suggests a series of things that I'm pretty confident that Congress will do, which will be completely wrong. Because they always do it, and they're already doing it. Elizabeth Warren, just a week ago, as if she read this book, came out with one of the things I predicted they would do, which is a tax on robotics to transfer money to workers, which is uniquely dumb. The fact is, we cannot subsidize, we've never been able to subsidize changes in the market. The American market's too big. So we burn billions so that politicians can get elected. And it doesn't matter at all because the economy's too big. It's not going to affect it. It's all performance art. And that's what Elizabeth Warren's suggesting. She'll burn billions, but it won't do any good. We'll have fewer taxi drivers. We're going to have fewer radiologists. That's a fact. So the question once again is, what does the future hold for us? And what the book argues is that we have to preserve what I call a liberty-enhancing economy. This is not just the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, it's the 250th anniversary of the release of Adam Smith's great work, Wealth of Nations. That book was not a hit in Great Britain. It was a hit here. The framers immediately recognized that what this guy was talking about was the perfect economic theory to go with their political theory. They realized that there is no liberty unless you have economic independence. That's why Smith, Paine, even Hamilton, all of them loved aspects about an agricultural economy. Smith particularly loved it because you could literally plant something and produce your own wealth. It's like printing your own money. No one could keep you from doing that. It was the perfect political economic theory, and that's how Smith defined his book, by the way, was a political economic theory, not just an economic theory. And so the question is, how do we preserve that? Because the success we've had is the combination of the political Enlightenment theories and the free market theories of Adam Smith. How do we combine that? And part of it is that we have to focus on jobs which are going to be here. I call them Guinan jobs. Now, this is where we find out how many nerds there are in the audience. Okay, so I noticed a couple of you nodding, and that's shameful because you are a disgusting nerd, as am I. So Guinan, for those of you who actually dated in high school, Guinan was the bartender of the Starship Enterprise in 10 Forward. And when I was growing up, I couldn't understand why all of these characters on the Enterprise would be fighting Romulans and doing all types of stuff, and at the end they would all go to 10 Forward for a drink. And standing there in front of a replicator, a machine that makes things exactly alike, even human beings, down to their DNA, you would have Guinan, and they would have her make them their drink. So she could make the perfect Romulan sunrise cocktail on her best day, but probably not very often. That machine can do it 1,000,000 times over and have not a single variation. You will get the perfect cocktail ever made, every time, every order. And yet they would turn to Guinan and they'd say, make me a cocktail. The question is why? And the answer is clearly, they're not just there for the cocktail. They want a human being involved. So the question the book asks is, how many Guinan jobs are there? How many Guinan jobs are there where we want or need what I call a homocentric element to a product? And the answer is there's a lot of them. And the book talks about them. But that's where our emphasis is going to have to be. But that's not the greatest challenge that we face. The greatest challenge that we face is whether we can answer today Crevecoeur's question. But then is this American? Who are we? Who were we then? Who are we now? A lot of Americans can't answer that. If we can't, then maybe this should be our last anniversary. But I think we can. The interesting thing is that many of the things that we rally around, like Rosie the Riveter, are still with us. Actually, Rosie the Riveter, the pose actually that Rockwell came, comes out of the Sistine Chapel. He actually took the picture of Isaiah. It's sort of an interesting choice because Isaiah has this cherub who's whispering the fall of man into his ear, hearkening the fall of man. But you'll notice that Isaiah has the same face, that same look as Rosie the Riveter. He's not panicked. He seems resolved. He seems intent. In fact, that's what Rockwell was trying to convey. Under Rosie the Riveter's foot was a copy of Mein Kampf. On her, like some Soviet general, were medals, like the Westinghouse medal. He was clearly telling Hitler that he had a lot more to fear from her than the destroyers that she was making. We still look at that picture. It's still one of the most popular. So is this. This came in second, by the way, in the competition in Chicago. But it came in second in Chicago, and it is still one of the most popular pictures ever made in the United States. Why? Why would people in Chicago find this picture so grabbing? Why would it be today? Many people say, look, it's just a farmer and his wife. It's actually not a farmer. It was supposed to be a farmer and his daughter. But it doesn't matter because it's actually Grant Wood's dentist and his sister. But look at them. There was a sense of independence, a sense of calm resolution that people identified with, whether you were a farmer or not. You look at pictures like this woman on Ellis Island. Look at her face. She's coming to a nation and everything she owns is right on top of her head. Do you notice the face, the expressions look almost identical? She doesn't seem afraid. This could have been a picture from many of our own families. It could have been my grandmother. She came here from Sicily with a bag just like that one filled with sheepskins. It was the only thing her family had in Sicily they thought they might be able to sell in the United States. And you look at her face, and you ask, what then is this American? They knew how to answer that question. So did Thomas Paine. What then is this American? Thomas Paine's the ultimate example of that. When he said, we have in our power to begin the world anew. The birthday of a new world is at hand. He came here to reinvent himself. He came, like all those other images, to find his own manifest destiny. He came to a place where you could be anything you wanted to be, go as far as you want to go, as long as you were willing to work for it. That's why he's the quintessential American. He had failed in everything in his life and came to this place and succeeded. And that's why, and I'll end with this, in Philadelphia famously, Benjamin Franklin at the signing said that he had been looking at the Chippendale chair in the front of the hall and wondering all this time whether it was a rising or a setting sun. And after they had all agreed, he said, I realize now that it is a rising sun. It's still a rising sun. The reason the subtitle on Rage in the Republic is the unfinished story of the American Revolution is because this story will never be finished. Ben Franklin was right in his most famous quote that it's our republic to keep, because he knew every generation would have to keep this republic. But it is a rising sun. The fact is, we are in revolutionary times, but we remain a revolutionary people. That is the answer to what then is this American. Thank you very much.
Jonathan, thank you so much for that. I said earlier that I talked about the truths that we believe here at the Free State Foundation and joined them to what I think are the truths expounded in the Declaration of Independence. And I wanted today, in our anniversary celebration, to meld it with America's celebration. I had this line, you weren't here, but I'm going to indulge myself and quote it once more from Robert Frost that I like. Frost wrote that most of the change we think we see in life is due to truths being in and out of favor. And, I think that you and I probably agree, and consistent with what you've just told us, that we hope the truths proclaimed in the Declaration of Independence will always be in favor if America is going to endure in the way that we want it to be. So I'm going to trade you now this Free State Foundation cap for an inscription in your book. I think that's a fair trade, right? And I'm going to urge everyone, I think you probably already have been prompted to do this, but it's a terrific book, and my God, there couldn't be a better time to read it than between now and July 4th. So I urge you to read the book. So with that, I'm going to thank Jonathan again. And I forget, let's give him another round of applause. And I want to end this event by thanking all of you for coming and helping to celebrate it with me. I was particularly pleased to have the members of our academic board here earlier, and I do have caps for you guys as well. So thanks to you all, and we'll do it again, hopefully soon. Take care. Thank you.